Now, when it comes to what's going on in the Skylanders community right now, I think that the Return to Skyland series is one of the most ambitious things going on right now at the moment. Not because it's just me working on this, but I'm technically getting help from the rest of the community when it comes to Skylanders, some plot ideas, and even some other stuff. Like backgrounds and enemies, which I desperately need. Because of this, things are going to get a lot more complicated from here on out. Yes, I'm still going to be the final say on when something goes or not, and I still have a lot of the basic concepts for what the story is going to be solidified, but there's still a ton of people putting their hard work and effort into their own custom Skylanders works basically for free, and I don't want to let anyone down. Because of that, I need to figure out what to do when something doesn't stick or if something isn't as fleshed out as well as it could have been in a video. Because of that, I decided to create a sister series alongside the Return to Skyland series, Beyond the Portal, which is not only meant to fix whatever patches are in the massive yacht that is Return to Skylands, but it's also meant to serve as a spot to talk about the creation of some of my Skylanders, main characters, important decisions, and whatever else I feel like talking about. Since this is the first episode, it's going to be pretty disjointed compared to the other ones I'm hoping to do in the future, and depending on how this one goes, it might end up being the foundation of what this series looks like going forwards. So with all of that said and done, let's get started! Now, when it comes to the two characters that I introduced in Road to Woodburrow, Kino and Cyclops, they both actually have a very interesting history when it comes to their creations. And since this one is a little faster and more complex, let's talk about Cyclops first. Now, when it comes to the addition of new Skylanders for already existing groups within the Skylanders organization, Cyclops is probably one of the oldest new gimmick Skylanders to exist. Oh my god, that felt like a tongue twister. Now, Cyclops' name is meant to be a pun for sci-fi since he was originally going to be a futuristic looking tech Skylander, but since they sounded so familiar, it got lost in translation and everyone thought that his name was the normal Cyclops and not the pun Cyclops, and it got so confusing that I had to make a comment and pin it to clarify what his name actually is. And even though his name turned out to be a little bit of a mess, creating him wasn't that hard, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a struggle of any kind. When it comes to creating Cyclops, it actually wasn't as hard as I thought. I just used the Bionicle Earth Protector as a base before stripping it and adding details until it became its own thing. And funnily enough, there's actually a story behind how his head was made, and it made me chuckle a little bit. Now, the head model that Cyclops uses is actually a modified version of a common head design that I use on my other mocks that I like to call Ogre helmets, due to the fact that they all have a single eye hidden under these shoulder pieces that I turned into a mask of sorts. But when you look at Cyclops, he doesn't have the head and it looks bulkier without the mask piece. And to be completely honest, I'm not exactly sure how the hell I even made this one. This was one of those autopilot moments that most people eventually have with LEGO where you somehow end up building something that has LEGO set tier quality even though you don't know how the hell you even got to that point in the first place. Anyways, the last important thing to bring up is how I took pictures of him and cropped him out for the series. The reason why he looks so clean and why you can't really find any trace of the background that managed to end up on the photo is because I made his shot as clear as possible, making sure to focus on him when I took the picture before I remove the background and add a black and white effect on top of it to remove the color from the lights above him. And with him finished, let's get to Kino. Now, Kino's history is actually pretty interesting since his design was meant for a different character named Leo, and because of that, the two look exactly like each other. But the way that things are written between the two, they have pretty different personalities and backstories. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Because Leo was one of the first characters I made using this Pit Crew character creator as a base, he's been upgraded over and over again to the point that I not only have a bunch of older references of him if I need them, but a few modern versions of his character as well. But this is where the real madness starts. As I was making the first video, I would realize that for a lot of the scenes, Kino is less looking at a specific character and more staring at the camera. Stitchcraft had this problem when I made her video as well, but it was less of a problem there, and I knew that it was going to be a big problem here. So I decided that I'd make a couple of sprites with his eyes in different positions and make a completely separate group of eyes looking in different directions as well for future uses on future sprites. Now, when I made Stitchcraft's video, I had to make about 13 different sprites for her, and for most of it, it was just changing her expressions and giving her an arm. Looking at Kino's debut, however, and he has over 50 goddamn sprites. Do you have any idea how long that takes to make? Okay, as a reference for what I'm talking about here, if you go to Gacha Life, if you have it, I'd like you to go and make 50 different sprites and then screenshot all of them. You can imagine how long that would take, right? Well, add actually having to draw them out on top of the equation, and oh, it's just gonna take forever. And I'm sure that he's going to need way more with what I'm about to do, and not to mention the other characters I'm going to add using this as a base. Thank God I made all of those separate groups of eyes that I can basically copy and paste anywhere I need them, but still, that's going to be a lot of noise I'm going to have to deal with in the future. Speaking of which, Kino also unintentionally highlighted another problem with this series. Things getting lost in translation. Now, what I was trying to do was make Kino a reluctant hero protagonist since most of his actions so far have been for somewhat selfish reasons. But I did get a few comments calling Kino edgy, which he kind of is in a sense, but he's nowhere near the edgy that most of us know about, or at least that's not what I'm trying to do. Yes, the only reason he helped Cyclops out was because it was beneficial to him, and he was being a pain about it. But as things go on, you can see how his attitude changes and how he wants to protect people. Remember, he was the one who was ready to fight the Tyrant before Cyclops could even process what that was, and he was the person who basically took a bullet for him when he didn't have to, who at this point was a random guy he just met not even 30 minutes prior to all of this. He has heroic traits, but he doesn't want to admit it, and since we're entering spoiler territory, I'm going to stop myself here. Kino, along with everyone else in the story to a degree, is meant to be a dynamic around character and not a flat one unless they're a background character, because I honestly don't want my story to be a one-to-one with the games. I want this to be a little more like the comics if they were told like a Skylanders game, if that makes a little more sense. And since we're on the topic of Skylanders, I know that a lot of you are wondering what the elements of these two are, and their elements are air for Kino and dark for Cyclops, and the reason why they weren't stated in Road to Woodburrow was for two different reasons. Firstly, their elements weren't really that relevant for this level, and secondly, I was pretty torn on what their elements were supposed to be. Kino's was supposed to be water, but from what we've seen so far, he obviously leans towards air and I could still make some of his water stuff work, while Cyclops was a bit all over the place due to the pun in his name, Kino's insult during their argument, and the fact that if I made another tech giant, that would make the Giants roster look a little too weird for my liking. And then I realized that Cyclops would just work out better as a dark giant while leaving a space open if someone wanted to make a light giant. Maybe a sun elephant with armor made of light or something. And even though I considered reworking Kino's ability tree a little bit to make him fit into the air element war, I just decided not to do it, which I'll talk about in a future video. And with that said and done, it's time to get into some other stuff. Now, when it comes to Woodburrow's inclusion, the biggest question that I got about it was, where's Tessa? And this is the one time where I completely forgot that Tessa existed. Like, I seriously don't know how I screwed this up, but I'm pretty sure it's an easy fix in episode 2. I'm not going to say how, but I'm sure it's going to be at least satisfactory. Another thing that I want to talk about for a little bit is the Tyrant itself. Now, I know that the name of the Tyrant is kinda bland, but the reason why I did that is because if I revealed the Tyrant's actual name, it would ruin some stuff. And since this version is a boss while the others are their own thing, kind of like the bosses in Trap Team making their appearance as normal enemies, I just bit the bullet on this one and went along with it. But if anyone wants some hints on who or what he could be tied to, look at his colors. Next, let's talk about the QTEs because, oh my god, those alone were probably the most stressed I've ever gotten when it comes to the series so far, right under screwing up Flynn or Spyro's personalities. Now, even though I said that the QTEs were the main reason that you were locked to certain Skylanders, that's not exactly true. Yes, the QTEs were a main factor, but there were other reasons. The first one was the fact that I didn't just want to skip over the boss after I explained it. That would just feel a little off going from a boss fight at the end of the level with the only segue being after you defeat X. Secondly, we didn't really see Skylanders work together like Kino and Cyclops did in-game if we exclude cutscenes, which are only one-time occurrences that we only get to see once. But we have seen this before in other source materials, the biggest example coming up in my head being when Spyro pulled Spyro out the way of Frightbeard's attacks. And optional QTEs are probably the easiest way to do that without changing the buttons or making some support attack thing using RB and the D-pad, or the A, B, X, or Y button, because I feel like that would be doing way too much, and if I did that with the D-pad, that would require you to stop. But if you guys like that idea of support attacks / combos, then let me know. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to the first episode is the editing, because oh my goodness, the editing was so much fun and so much pain at the same time. Let me explain. Now, don't get me wrong, this video was actually really fun to edit. Yes, it was time consuming and CapCut nearly killed itself multiple times, but hey, if it worked, it worked. But one of the largest issues that I really had was framing the scenes because out of everything, they were probably the most taxing part out of all of this. Not only did I have to try and find backgrounds that would somewhat fit what I was trying to do, but I also had to find images that were as royalty-free as possible outside of Skylanders sprites and stuff that I owned. And I also had to do everything in my power to avoid AI images, because when you zoom in on an AI image, it looks pretty bad as the images themselves aren't blurring together at a distance to make something look somewhat coherent. After getting images that I needed, downloading effects, and using other effects built into CapCut, which just made it hurt even more, everything was pretty much straight sailing ahead, and then Woodburrow happened. Now, Woodburrow was interesting since it was probably the most annoying scene I ever had to make. I had to position Wind Up in-game to get the right angle, screenshot it, download it to my tablet, and then take it to PixArt, where I spent damn near an hour using the AI remover to cut stuff out and try to make it look as best as I could. I then realized that due to the nature of my sprites and the fact that Swap Force's camera is technically looking down at Woodburrow at an angle, I had to perspective the whole thing as best as I could. But thankfully, I was able to get an image that I was fine with, and it would go on to be one of the most important backgrounds in Return to Skylands. But with that out the way, I'm going to cut this here. Now, I was originally going to make Return to Skylands a monthly thing, or at least a consistent thing, but for now it's probably going to be a while until the next episode, since not only do I have to finish setting up the Discord to make sure nobody's just running amok in there, but I also need to reorganize the entire story to make Eon fit into there, because I realized that the amount of plot holes resulting from him existing would turn RTS into Swiss cheese, and by that I mean none of it would make sense. But for now, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow as a channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out the lore videos, Return to Skylands, and the music used in this video in the description down below, and I will see you all in the next one.